video we're going to do some basic dimensioning. We'll cover more advanced dimensioning in another video. We're going to deal exclusively with sketch entities. We're not going to get into dimensioning to solid bodies or surfaces or anything like that. We're going to stick to the sketch environment for right now. So first I'm going to, and again, if you watched the last video, I should have this set up and I just don't yet. We're going to check and make sure it's ANSI. And I'm going to sketch on the front plane. So I'm going to go ahead and enter a sketch. And we're going to dimension some very basic items. So we'll just draw a very simple shape here. Just a block with a notch in it. And we'll go ahead and dimension this out as if you were making some sort of widget. And so what you'll see, there's two different ways to pick. If you noticed, I picked the two sides to constrain this line. Now I can pick just like this, and the reason that I don't do that, it matters where you pick in Solidworks. And so let's say I come in here later, I come back to this sketch. I've done a bunch of stuff and I decide I need to reshape this and I need it to look something like this. And I've got to remove that area. Because I picked the line itself, it dimensions to the endpoints. Now if I go up here and I trim that portion out, the dimension disappears. And so I have to redimension it, and you know, you may have to do the undo button. You may not have memorized or remembered what size it was before you trim that section out. So what I'm going to do is on top of that right there, I'm going to dimension, I'm going to actually pick the two sidelines. And SolidWorks, the difference that it sees is, so this top dimension right here is actually dimensioned to this line. Well, when I trim this portion of the line out, it's attached to that point right there. And so it no longer knows what to be attached to and drops the dimension out or erases it. In this case here, this dimension is dimensioned to this line and this line. Well, when I trim this out, this line technically still exists, it's just been shortened. So we're going to do that same trim command, and we're going to go through there, and you'll notice which one's left over. The other thing is a good time to address it now since it's showing. This is called a driven dimension. It means that it's driven by wherever the geometry is. A driving dimension, and in your setup, your driven dimensions are probably going to be a light gray. I don't like colors that are close, and so in my case, I set it nearer to a red, meaning that to me a red dimension would be something's wrong. SolidWorks has red in its history tree for broken or items that have a problem. So I set this to a dark orange. It lets me know that this is a driven dimension, and it's a much easier contrast between the two dimension types. This is a driving dimension, this is a driven dimension. So if you want to change those colors, real quick we'll go there. It's under options and it's under colors, and down here you can find dimensions, and you can see non-imported driven is right there, and I just changed the color from a gray to this particular color here. So you can set it to whatever you want. My customers have got used to those colors, and I'm used to it. It makes sense for me. So anyways, back to this. Oh, and if I want to change this to a driving dimension, I just right click on it, and down here I uncheck driven, and it'll automatically go to a driving dimension. So we're going to step backwards out of all that stuff, and I'm going to delete these two items because I don't actually dimension that way, and I'm going to go between these points, and that's driven, and we'll make this last one 3. So one of the things you'll notice is all the lines turned black and that means that this sketch is fully constrained. Now if I went and changed this to a driving dimension, it's going to go yellow, and it's telling me that I've got too many dimensions. It's over constrained. These items here are being constrained by too many dimensions, and so I'm going to have to turn one of these back into a driven dimension. Just going to do the undo button so we can get back there. And if I need to go at the sketch level and add a fillet, you know, I can do that here. We're going to add a fillet and type in our size. And Solidworks knows that you're inserting a fillet and keeps the dimensions intact. Alright, so also what we're going to do is we're going to go in and do a sketch chamfer. And the pick order matters. So if I pick here and here, the angle measurement is facing down. If I undo and I do this over again and I pick bottom and then side, then the angle is pointing to the side. So pick order does matter, and I can go ahead and accept that and extrude it if I want to, but I'm going to move on from here. So let's see, circles. I've got, let's say, 2 circles here, and I want the first circle to be 2.5 and the second circle to be 1. And I want them to be at an angle of 45, let's say. So we're going to go up here and grab my center line. And the other thing we're going to do is we're going to measure between these. Now, there's a number of ways I can do this. I can do it like that, which gives me center to center. I can actually catch this line, which happens to be defining the distance between them. I can also hold down the shift key and I can get my minimum distance, and you can see I can pull straight up, straight sideways, get minimum numbers, or I can just get the minimum distance between them. Same with the max distance. Hold down the shift key and I've got my max distance, and you can see how that trays out in different directions. And so I'm going to go ahead and work with picking the 2 circles themselves. And now I need to dimension this as far as angularity, and so I'm going to go like this and add this. There's also another way you can do this. You can display the top plane, and there are reasons to do both. I can dimension between the plane and that line, 45, or I can also dimension just between the oops, exited out of the sketch. Hold on a sec. Or the other option is I can go ahead and create sketch geometry in here and do it that way. This horizontal line here is constrained to horizontal, so maybe the nice thing about doing it this way is this could become relative down the road if I need it to be. So let's say I want to keep the 45, but I want to change this. I can delete that constraint. Still makes it 45 between the 2 lines, but maybe now I want to add a third angle. And so I'm going to come off here now. Oops. Maybe I want to drive it by something else, maybe a vertical line. And so I can go ahead and add 135 here. 135. So let's see, then we've got rectangles. You know, most people are going to generate them like this, or they're going to generate them off off of the origin and then maybe set it to center point. Do what I tell you to, Solidworks. Midpoint. Why do you not like that? Why are you angry? Wow, okay, I'm not sure why I did that, but so you can, obviously that's setting up your constraints, but corner to corner, so you know, obviously there's a number of ways you can dimension this. You could dimension it like that. I don't know why you'd need to. Most people are going to come along and they're going to do this, and they're going to type their number in, and then they're going to do this and get their number over here. And so that's it with that. What else? Center rectangle. Just makes it so you can generate it from the center. Dimensioning is basically the same way. It does add 2 diagonals. As far as dimensioning goes, there's not anything I use these for usually. We could do an arc. Oops. So one of the things that I like to do is, so there's often times where I'll set these vertical, and that makes sure that this stays tangent to a horizontal line. There's a, you know, you could also set it tangent to the line. In fact, I'll set these 2 tangent. But what it does in this case is you can see that it's going to stay now by setting those vertical. It's going to stay on that top line. And I'm going to go ahead and set the radius, and we want that to be 1.5. And then if you want the diameter, even though it's a radiused part, you can right click on it and go down to display options here and display as diameter. So you can go like that, and it'll actually show the diameter instead of the radius. And I'm going to put it back to radius. And then we'll draw, let's see, we'll draw a line down here, and we'll trim out this section. And we'll set all 3 of these equal. Dimension here, 2.75 is fine. And we'll set these 2 equal. So maybe some of this, you also get to see a little bit of workflow. Let's see, why does that, oh, what it did is it's no longer, that point's not constrained. So what I'll do is I'll just set that. That coincident, I'll fix that. So you can see 2 dimensions has completely defined this part, and everything else is constrained. If instead you want the circumference, you can pick the 2 endpoints, 1, 2, and then pick the radius, and it'll give you the circumference. Or the chord distance, if you want to, since it's a radius, it'd be the chord. Actually, it's not the chord distance, it's the circumference of the radius. So sometimes there is a need for chord distance. Let's put in a construction line from here to here, and maybe you want the chord distance to be 1/4 inch. And Fooey on Yui. Hold down the shift button. And I don't like that, so I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to set this and this. merged. Oh, you liar. No, I can't set it because they're... What are we going to do with that? We'll undo, leave the vertical in there. So yeah, that would be your a vertical distance from the chord to the farthest point on the radius. I've had to use that from time to time, so that does come in handy. Let's see, slots. I pretty much exclusively use the slot tool now under, if you go to features and then the hole wizard, they've got slots in the hole wizard now. I don't know if they've got curved slots, but they do have regular slots. And if you're working in a fab shop, you'll get guys with different preferences on how they want these dimensioned. Most engineers are going to dimension them center to center because that's how much the bolt can travel. But I've noticed there's a lot of fab guys at fab shops that want it dimensioned outside. So I'm holding down the shift key here, and that's how you get the outside points. And we're going to delete this one, and we're going to go down to... I didn't pick it. Try that again. Oh, it actually dimensioned it as driving. And then we're going to set, you can do radius. I actually on these prefer to pick the two horizontal lines. I know that's the diameter, but it just helps me mentally. So we can go with 0.83. The other thing you can do is pick this and it's going to give you radius, but you can right click and put display as diameter. Same diff. So I'm actually going to want this slot to be 0.5. Maybe plus a little bit for clearance, so we'll go 0.55. And then we want the overall length of the slot to be 3. And so there's a lot of fab guys I know that will do it this way. And there are times where maybe you've got a shape that's passing by. Let's say it looks like this. And, you know, maybe it comes like that. And like this. And we want those to be tangent. And they're going to want to see, your shop guy's probably going to want to see what this distance is. He's going to want to know that there's enough meat there to not have that slot break out of the corner of whatever this might happen to be. And so that's typically how they'll want to see that. And the thing is, you know, depending on what size bolt you're putting in here, the head might stick out past the edge here, and so there's a number of different reasons that he might want that dimension. So that's those type of slots. So here is 3-point arc slot, and what I'm going to do is draw one and just come up with a shape first. And I want to set this thing so that the tips are horizontal. So I'm going to draw a line between them. I'm also going to I'm going to set the center point on the origin. Set that to horizontal. And let's see here. I'm going to set the radius to 1. And I'm going to set the point-to-point distance. Actually, I'm going to set that by an angle. So then I'm going to draw lines from the two endpoints here. And I'm going to dimension in between them at 45 degrees. And then as far as the actual slot itself, we want to make that 0.55. And we'll set the radius at 2 this time. You can see how it changes. Instead of having the radius I can change that to driven. You know, there's never, for me, I'd rather set it to driven and have another dimension I can link to or look at later. And we'll go point to point distance. We'll set that at 2. And so there's a number of different ways you can dimension these arc slots. I can change this to 50 degrees, and I can go to like 75 degrees. And so what you'll see is it changes the radius as I do that. If I go back to 45 degrees, if you watch the radius, it'll change. So with this at 45 degrees, the radius is increased. So there's a number of ways to drive those. Arcs behave real similarly. We can do these, and I happen to be doing an inscribed circle, so we'll set our circle diameter at 1, and then we'll make sure that one of these is set to, you can either do horizontal or vertical. If you set it to horizontal, so you might be doing a bolt head, and so that would be your the size in between the flats. You know, if you were to put a wrench on that, not corner to corner but flat to flat. So that's pretty straightforward. We'll cover splines later because they get a little bit tougher and they're quite a bit to dimensioning those. We'll do an ellipse real quick. So you can set these, if you looked at the last video, you can turn this ellipse however you want to. I'm going to actually set those horizontal, and I'm going to dimension this direction will go 3, and this direction will go 1, and you can see what the ellipse looks like. And then we'll set this on the origin, get rid of this guy, select chain, delete. And so you can see it's fully constrained, this ellipse is. There's not a whole lot else I can think of right now. We'll cover splines and dimensioning between planes, and the other thing you can dimension between. So let's say I set up, let's get out of this sketch, and let's say I have the top plane and the right plane, and I put a axis between those. You can see where that's at. And so I now have the right plane I'm going to sketch on, but where the top plane crosses it, you can see where that axis is. So I'm going to go ahead and start a sketch on the right plane. And I'm going to put some dimensions, something in here. Maybe a triangle, and we'll set this and this parallel. And we'll set these equal. Make ourselves an isosceles triangle. And you'll notice that you can dimension between the axis and the object. Now, the nice thing about that is these two happen to be coplanar, right? But let's say instead I've got off the right plane, I generate a new plane, and that new plane is 3 inches out. And so you can see that this plane is now 3 inches forward from the right plane. And we're going to start a new sketch on that plane. And we're going to carry this thing, we'll carry these two elements forward. So we're going to convert them, and then we're going to put an arc in there instead. So we're going to put an arc between these 2 points, and we're going to dimension that. 8. You can see it's fully constrained. let's say instead of constraining it by its radius, I want to constrain it by the distance to this. They're no longer coplanar, but you can still dimension to it. So we're going to dimension from that axis. Hold down the shift key so we get our minimum distance, because that's usually the one you're going to want. And we want 1 inch between them. So you can see that the dimension, it knows that it's attached to the axis, but it's projected back. You're not going to see the axis in the coplanar sketch. It's attached, but there's no extension line. You can see the extension line shows up now at the end of the axis, and if I change that axis around, it should update. Let me go back into the sketch. Yeah. So once you exit out and come back, it's going to be attached at wherever this axis is. So that is the long and short of some basic dimensioning. If you have any questions or comments, you can post them in the comments below the video, and I'll try to answer them. Thanks.